Jason Miller was the epitome of the American dream. At 35, he was a successful businessman with a loving family and a luxurious home in the suburbs of New York. Married to Emily for 10 years, they had 2 children, Ethan and Sophie, who completed the picture of an ideal life. Jason and Emily were the couple everyone admired: attractive, successful, and passionate. However, this perfect life hid secrets that Jason guarded as carefully as he managed his businesses. The facade of a devoted husband and father was starting to crumble from within, eaten away by a forbidden passion he never imagined he could feel again. 6 months ago, Jason met Sarah Blake, a young lawyer who was assisting his company in a complex merger case. Sarah was the opposite of Emily. While Emily was reserved and serene, Sarah was intense and challenging, always ready for a new adventure. Jason felt alive with her, as if he were experiencing a side of himself that he had buried long ago. Their meetings began discreetly, in hotels and bars far from downtown Manhattan, but the intensity of the relationship quickly turned what was supposed to be a simple affair into something deeper and more complicated. Jason found himself torn between 2 worlds: the safe and stable world he had built with Emily, and the exciting and unpredictable world that Sarah offered him. However, the more Jason tried to keep these 2 worlds separate, the more they began to collide. He found himself inventing increasingly elaborate excuses to explain his absences to Emily, and the lies started to weigh on his conscience. The dilemma of betraying the woman he still loved, who no longer gave him the thrill that Sarah provoked, was consuming him from within. Jason's true conflict was not just about the women in his life, but about who he really was and what he wanted for his future. He was caught in a moral and emotional crossroads, unable to choose between the security of his family life and the overwhelming passion of his extramarital affair. Meanwhile, Sarah began to pressure him to make a definitive decision. She didn't want to be just the other woman, and demanded that Jason choose between her and Emily. But how could he make that choice without completely destroying the world he had built? Jason knew that any decision he made would have devastating consequences, not just for him, but for everyone around him. As the weeks passed, Jason found himself increasingly mired in his dilemma. The meetings with Sarah became more intense, and he began to realize that his feelings for her went beyond simple physical attraction. Sarah understood him in a way he hadn't expected, and this only increased the confusion in his mind. She wasn't just an escape, she had become an essential part of his life. On the other hand, Emily, who was always perceptive, began to notice changes in her husband's behavior. Jason was more distant, absent during important moments with the children, and often avoided physical contact. Emily tried to convince herself that it was just work stress, but her instinct told her that something was wrong. She began to discreetly investigate, analyzing Jason's behavior, the times he came home, and even checking his email accounts. At the same time, Sarah began to press Jason with more intensity. She no longer wanted to live in the shadows, being the second option. Sarah knew she was falling in love with Jason, but couldn't bear the idea of continuing as the mistress. She wanted more, she wanted everything, and that meant Jason had to make a choice. Jason, on the other hand, was lost. He knew that no matter what choice he made, someone would be deeply hurt. If he chose Sarah, he would destroy his family, ruin his children's future, and lose the woman who, despite everything, he still loved. But if he chose Emily, he would have to give up the passion and the sense of renewal that Sarah provided, living out the rest of his days in a routine that now seemed suffocating. The situation became even more complicated when, on a Friday night, while Jason and Sarah were dining out of town, they accidentally encountered an old college friend of Emily's. The man, surprised to see Jason with another woman, quickly realized what was happening. Sarah felt the weight of his judgmental gaze, and at that moment, knew that this encounter could mean the end of her secret relationship with Jason. Emily's college friend did not hesitate to inform Jason's wife, moved by a sense of loyalty to the old friend. Devastated by the confirmation of her suspicions, Emily decided to confront Jason. She waited for him to come home that night, holding back tears while trying to maintain her composure. When Jason finally walked through the door, exhausted and still affected by the uncomfortable encounter, he found Emily in the living room, holding a family photo. "Who is she, Jason?" were the only words she managed to say before a sepulchral silence took over the house. Jason felt the ground open beneath his feet. What he had feared for so long had finally happened. There was no more hiding, lying, or pretending that everything was under control. He tried to justify himself, talking about the emptiness he felt, about how their life had changed, but nothing he said could erase the pain Emily felt. Meanwhile, Sarah, alone in her apartment, reflected on the encounter at the restaurant. She knew that things had changed, and perhaps, from that moment, the relationship between her and Jason would never be the same. Sarah loved Jason, but she also knew he was caught between two worlds, the world of commitment and the world of passion. And at that moment, she began to doubt whether he would ever have the courage to choose. Jason's conflict reached its apex when he was forced to face the consequences of his actions. The pressure to make a definitive choice increased each day, but he knew he couldn't continue like this. Jason needed to decide, but how to choose between two parts of himself, both equally strong and fundamental to his identity. After the tense conversation with Emily, Jason spent the following days in a state of deep introspection. The reality of his actions and the devastating impact they had begun to fully set in. However, instead of making a clear decision, he found himself even more paralyzed by the fear of the unknown. Emily, on the other hand, was destroyed inside, but she was not the kind of woman who gave up easily. She decided that she would not allow Jason's infidelity to be the end of her life as she knew it. After a frank conversation with a close friend, who had also experienced a betrayal, Emily resolved that she would give Jason one last chance to save their marriage. But things would need to change radically. She proposed to Jason that they attend couples therapy. Jason, surprised by Emily's proposal, agreed, still uncertain about his own feelings, but recognizing that he owed it to the woman who had always been by his side. The therapy sessions were painful, forcing both to confront truths they had avoided for years. Emily confessed that she had always known something was wrong, but didn't want to believe that Jason would be capable of betraying her. Jason, on the other hand, had to admit to himself that the double life he had been leading was unsustainable and that, deep down, he still had deep feelings for Emily. During this period, Jason distanced himself from Sarah. He knew he couldn't continue the situation while trying to repair his marriage, but Sarah's absence troubled him. It was as if a part of himself was missing, and he didn't know how to deal with that gap. Jason began to realize that his relationship with Sarah was not just a passing affair. It was something that had changed his view of himself and what he wanted from life. Sarah, on the other hand, felt Jason's distancing as a betrayal of its own. She refused to be the second option and began to prepare to move on, even if that meant leaving behind the man she loved. However, something unexpected happened that would change the course of events. Sarah discovered she was pregnant. The shock of this news left her reeling. How would Jason react? What would this mean for their future? With a heavy heart, she decided to tell Jason, hoping that this would force him to finally make a decision. That night, Jason received a call from Sarah. Her voice was shaky, different from any tone he had heard before. "Jason, we need to talk." "I'm pregnant," she said, leaving a heavy silence in the air. Jason, stunned, couldn't respond immediately. Thousands of thoughts ran through his head. The impact of this news on his marriage, on his children, on his life. He knew he was now facing a definitive turning point, where any decision he made would have irreversible consequences. The next day, Jason went to Sarah's apartment to talk. He was nervous, confused, and afraid, but he knew he couldn't run away from this situation. When he arrived, he found Sarah sitting on the couch, her eyes red from crying. She looked at him with a mix of hope and despair, waiting for him to say something that would ease her pain. "Sarah," Jason started, "I don't know what to do. I never imagined something like this could happen. But you need to know that I'm lost. I love you, but I also love my family. And now, with a baby on the way, that changes everything." Sarah, trying to remain calm, responded, "I don't want to be the woman who destroys a family, Jason. But I also can't pretend that none of this is happening. I need to know what you want, what you really desire for the future." Jason knew he was at a crossroads. He could no longer delay the decision. His life was about to change forever, and he had to choose which path to follow. But deep down, he also knew that any choice he made would come with a high price. Jason spent the following days in a fog of uncertainties and fears. The news of Sarah's pregnancy had turned his life upside down, leaving him unsure of how to deal with the consequences of his choices. He knew his indecision was hurting everyone he loved, but still, the gravity of the situation left him paralyzed. Emily, aware that something was wrong but unaware of the details, continued to attend therapy sessions with Jason. She noticed that he was even more distant, and this left her in a state of constant anxiety. Despite this, Emily was determined to save her marriage, believing that there was still a chance to rebuild what they had lost. In a particularly difficult session, the therapist asked Jason to express his true feelings, without fear of judgment. Jason, pressured by the sincerity of the situation, finally opened his heart. He spoke about how he felt trapped between two worlds, the safe and familiar world of his life with Emily, and the new and exciting world that Sarah had brought to him. He admitted that the infidelity was not just a mistake, but a symptom of something deeper that was missing in his life. Emily, hearing these words, felt a deep pain but also an emerging clarity. For the first time, she understood the extent of Jason's emotional confusion and how torn he was. Even so, she knew she couldn't continue in a marriage where there was no total commitment and truth. Emily made a painful but necessary choice. She looked at Jason, with tears in her eyes, and said, "I love you, Jason, but I can't continue living like this. If you can't choose what you really want, then I will have to make that choice for us." Jason was caught off guard by Emily's determination. He realized that he was about to lose not just Sarah, but also Emily and his family. It was time to make a definitive decision. That night, after the therapy session, Jason drove to the beach he used to visit when he was younger, seeking clarity amid the turmoil of his thoughts. The sound of the waves and the salty air helped him reflect on his life and the choices that had led him to that point. He remembered how he had fallen in love with Emily, all the moments they had shared, and also the intense connection he felt with Sarah. He knew he couldn't have both, and that any decision would bring pain. Jason decided that he needed to be honest, above all. He knew he could no longer continue with the lies and that it was time to face reality. With a heavy heart, he made the decision to end his relationship with Sarah. He knew it would be painful, but he also knew he couldn't continue leading a double life. The next day, Jason went to Sarah's apartment to talk. When he arrived, he found Sarah waiting for him, anxious and apprehensive. He sat next to her, held her hands, and with tears in his eyes, began to speak. "Sarah, you brought me something I never imagined I would feel again. You made me see the world in a new and different way. But I can't continue like this. I need to be honest with you, with myself, and with my family." Sarah interrupted him, her eyes full of tears. "Jason, I know you're in a difficult position, but I'm pregnant. We can't just ignore that." Jason took a deep breath and replied, "I know, and that makes everything even harder. But I can't build a life based on lies and betrayal. I want to be present for our child, but I can't continue our relationship this way. I need to try to rebuild my family, as difficult as that may be." Sarah, devastated, knew this was a possibility, but still, the pain of hearing those words was unbearable. She released Jason's hands, feeling betrayed and abandoned, but also understanding the gravity of the situation. "I understand, Jason. I didn't want it to end like this, but if this is your decision, I will have to accept it." Jason left the apartment feeling slightly lighter, but also devastated. He knew this was the right decision, but he also knew it wouldn't be easy to move forward. He now needed to return home and face the consequences of his actions, starting the difficult process of rebuilding his life with Emily, knowing that nothing would be like before. Jason returned home with a heavy heart, but determined to fix what remained of his marriage. He knew he would need to be honest with Emily, tell the truth about Sarah's pregnancy, and face the consequences of his choices. When he walked through the door, he found Emily in the living room, looking at an old family photo, where everyone seemed happy and carefree. The pain in Emily's eyes was palpable. "Emily, we need to talk," Jason began, trying to keep calm. She looked at him, knowing that something big was coming. "I've been honest with you about Sarah, but there's something else. She's pregnant." The words came out of Jason's mouth like a punch in Emily's stomach. She fell silent, absorbing the information, and then, tears began to flow down her face. "So, is this it? You really destroyed everything," she said, her voice broken by pain. Jason tried to approach, but Emily stepped back, raising her hand to prevent him from getting closer. "No, Jason. I need some time. I need to think about what this means for me, for us, for our children." With those words, Emily left the room, leaving Jason alone with his guilt and regret. In the days that followed, Emily remained distant, avoiding Jason and focusing on the children. She knew she needed to make a decision about the future, but every time she thought about everything she had lost, the pain was overwhelming. Jason, on the other hand, was determined to do everything he could to win back Emily's trust, even knowing that the task would be almost impossible. Meanwhile, Sarah was also facing her own battles. The pregnancy was not easy, and she found herself alone, without Jason's support, which he had promised to provide. but whose heart was still divided. The loneliness and uncertainty about the future began to weigh on her, and Sarah found herself in a state of constant anguish, trying to imagine what it would be like to raise a child without the man she loved. An unexpected turning point happened when Emily received a letter. It was from Sarah. In the letter, Sarah explained that she never wanted to destroy Jason's family and that, despite everything, she had decided to move forward and raise the child alone. Sarah wrote with sincerity, asking Emily for forgiveness for all the pain caused and wishing that, somehow, both could find peace. Emily, reading the letter, felt a mix of emotions. Part of her was furious, but another part could not ignore Sarah's honesty and remorse. The letter made her realize that, despite everything, she did not want to live filled with hatred and resentment. She wanted to find a way to move forward, with or without Jason. Emily finally decided it was time to have a definitive conversation with Jason. She called him to the garden, where they used to spend afternoons together, and there, under the starry sky, they began to talk. Jason was nervous, expecting the worst, but determined to accept any decision Emily made. "Jason," Emily started, "I read Sarah's letter, and although I'm still hurt, I realize that I can't continue living like this. I need to decide what's best for me, for our children. I'm willing to try again, but with conditions. You need to be honest with me from now on, and more importantly, you need to commit fully to this family." Jason, relieved to have a chance at reconciliation, promised Emily that he would do everything necessary to win back her trust and rebuild their life together. He knew the road would be long and difficult, but he was willing to move forward, this time with total transparency and commitment. However, fate had other surprises in store. A few weeks later, while Jason was slowly trying to repair his relationship with Emily, he received an urgent call from Sarah. She was in the hospital, and the baby was about to be born prematurely. Jason, in a mix of concern and fear, rushed to the hospital, where he found Sarah in a critical state. The situation was serious, and the doctor explained that there were complications for both the mother and the baby. Jason, overwhelmed by a wave of panic, realized that, despite all the decisions he had made, he still cared deeply for Sarah and the child they were about to bring into the world. He stood by her side, holding her hand, as she struggled to bring the child into the world. Finally, after hours of tension, the baby was born. It was a girl, small and fragile, but miraculously strong. Jason felt a mix of joy and pain, knowing that this new life was tied to a series of difficult choices and unforeseen consequences. Sarah, exhausted but relieved, looked at Jason with a look of resignation and hope. "Take care of her, Jason. No matter what happens, she needs you." With the premature arrival of his daughter, Jason's life changed irrevocably. The birth of the girl brought a mix of emotions: joy at the miracle of a new life, but also a heavy weight of responsibility and guilt. He knew that, regardless of his choices, his life would never be the same. Emily, upon learning of the child's birth, was taken by a wave of contradictory feelings. Part of her wanted to distance herself from the entire situation, letting Jason and Sarah deal with the consequences of their actions. But another part of Emily, the part that still loved Jason and recognized the man he could be, wanted to try to find a solution, even if that meant accepting this new reality in her life. Jason, for his part, was in a state of deep introspection. He knew he needed to be present for his daughter, but he was also determined to save his marriage with Emily. In the days following the girl's birth, Jason made sure to be the best father possible, visiting Sarah and the daughter daily in the hospital, while trying, at the same time, to rebuild trust with Emily. Sarah, observing Jason's effort to be present, realized that, although she still loved him, she could not keep the hope that they could be a complete family. She made the difficult decision to let Jason go, understanding that he belonged to another world, the one he was desperately trying to fix with Emily. "Jason," Sarah said one day, as he held little Emma in his arms, "I don't want you to feel trapped between us. I know you love your family and that you're trying to do what's right. You will always be part of Emma's life, but I think it's time for me to follow my own path." Jason, moved by Sarah's words, knew that was the right decision. He thanked Sarah for her understanding and promised to always be present for his daughter, even if their lives took different paths. With that decision, Jason returned to Emily, determined to fix his marriage. They continued couples therapy, this time with a more honest and open approach. Emily, although still hurt, began to see in Jason the genuine effort to change and be a better husband and father. Slowly, she began to open her heart again, and they began to rebuild the foundation of their relationship, one day at a time. Time passed, and Sarah moved on with her life, raising Emma with Jason's support, but maintaining a healthy distance. She returned to focus on her career and her own happiness, knowing that, although her story with Jason did not have the ending she hoped for, she still had something wonderful to take care of, her daughter. Jason and Emily, on the other hand, continued to work on their marriage. It was not easy, and there were many ups and downs along the way, but both were committed to rebuilding the trust and love that had brought them together in the first place. Eventually, they managed to find a new balance in their lives, accepting that perfection does not exist, but that true love is strong enough to overcome even the greatest adversities. In the end, Jason learned a valuable lesson about the consequences of his choices and the importance of honesty and commitment. He knew that, although his life was more complicated than he could have ever imagined, he was fortunate to still have Emily by his side, a woman who forgave and accepted him despite everything. The story of Jason, Emily, and Sarah did not have a perfect ending, but it had a realistic and surprising one, where everyone involved found a way to move forward, to learn and grow from their experiences. Deep down, Jason knew he would always be between two worlds, the world of the family he so valued and the new life he never expected. But this time, he was determined to make the right choices. Years later, Jason found himself in a different, but better place than where he had been before. Emily and he had overcome their difficulties, creating a loving and stable environment for their children. Sarah, for her part, became a dedicated and successful mother, and Emma grew up knowing she was loved by all. On a spring afternoon, Jason, Emily, Ethan, Sophie, and Emma were all gathered in a park, enjoying a sunny day. Jason watched his family, including the daughter born from such a tumultuous period of his life, and felt a peace he had not known for a long time. He knew the road to get there had been full of challenges, but in the end, they had all found a way to be happy, despite the difficulties. Jason, looking at Emily, smiled, knowing that, although life had taken them down unexpected paths, they had found a way to stay together. They had overcome the traitor's dilemma, and now they were ready to face the future, one step at a time.